your dad took you. What captivated you the most?
I think the overall pageantry and excitement of the races. I mean, you go there, and when you're a little kid, you see these horses, and it's like going to the zoo in a way when you just go and you're amazed by the animals and want to learn more about the animals. And you see all these pretty people, especially at Del Mar. It's very glossy. So lots of pretty people, and the jockeys coming by, knowing that they're in charge of directing these athletes around the track, and knowing that, wow, these are really world-class athletes too. And I remember the first race I watched, I was just in awe of the horses and how fast they were going. And as the race went on, the excitement of the crowd and hitting the wire and the whole crowd going, ooh, when it was a photo finish. It just, everything was just mesmerizing to me. And I was like, I need to learn more about this sport because I'm just having a blast.
So he stayed captivated enough to want to really get into horse racing. And like many of us, we start out at the bottom. You have to cut your teeth. And one of the first jobs on a racetrack, mine is a hot walker. So explain to us people say, what's a hot walker? So explain what your role was and how that came to be, because you were still in high school.
I was 15. I wasn't legally allowed to work, actually. I had to get a work permit just to complete my first year. That's how young I was. But we had a neighbor at the time named Gail Van Leer, who's a bloodstock agent. And a bloodstock agent essentially is somebody who buys horses for owners, breeders. They look at their inventory. If they have mares, for example, the bloodstock agent's in charge of saying, okay, what stallion can we breed to? They manage for the owners. And the deal is, Gail knew that my dad really liked horse racing and would go to Del Mar, so she took me to the backstretch, and Dad as well. What ended up happening was, eventually when I was 15 years old, we had this idea, hey, if you want to get involved in the business, maybe we can get you hooked up with a trainer. And there were two options, I found out, John Sadler or Richard Mandela. So two very good options. Those were the two options. Yeah.
So it's not like he was working for somebody that had two horses and could only pay him in donuts. He wound up working for the coup de grace out in California for John Sadler. Was there a fear when you first started hot walking? Because horses can be really intimidating.
Big time. There was a big time fear. I mean, I had actually taken riding lessons, so I understood being around horses. And Gail had taken me to the backstretch a few times to feed the horses peppermints, get an idea of how this all goes about. But the really nits and crannies of it all, that's where I learned it. In the Sadler barn, where I ended up working. He trained Flightline. He's trained a number of very good horses. And at the time, he was thriving. He had a big string. He was winning a lot of races. He was the top dog at that time. By the way, I didn't explain what hot walking is. Hot walking is walking a horse that's hot, that has just exercised. So that's why they call it hot walking. The person is walking a hot horse.
And pretty much the only skill you have to know as a hot walker, well, not to be afraid, and your left from your right.
Right.
Because you make left-hand turns around a barn.
But there is a learning process to that. I mean, you still have to learn how to walk the horse. And it sounds, hey, it's easy enough, but they're 1,200-pound animals, you know.
And it's an important job
It's a very
as well.
important
It's
job.
a very important job.
Yeah. And it's a hard job.
It can
very
be a hard
hard.
job.
And that's one of the things I learned on the backstretch, just how much work and dedication and early mornings and it takes, because we all see these horses looking great, but people don't think about how much effort it takes to get them here, and it's an incredible process.
They say it takes a village. Well, it definitely takes a village in horse racing. So Matt transferred from hot walking to the front side of Del Mar, up in the press box.
Right.
So tell us kind of what your roles were, and if that's where you found your passion.
Right. So after 4 summers walking hots for John, and again, it was I could have done it for a year or two, and I went back a few extra times because I had that much fun. Actually, when I was 15, I just want to note this. My dad, what a trooper, he woke up every morning at 4:30 because I didn't have a driver's license, and he drove me to work.
That is parental love right
Right.
there.
So
That's parental love, getting up at 4:30.
it was a team effort. We were all in. And going to the press box, at the time, after my 4th year, I was ready to see where else can I branch out. And Gail was the one who told me. I feel like Gail's like my honorary, fairy godmother,
Yeah.
so to speak. And she said, well, I've heard that there's an opening in the press box where you can learn about front-side management and working with the writers, and it would be a good opportunity for you. So I applied for it, sent in a resume, got an interview, and got the job. Pretty much like
one
that.
of the famous voices in horse racing is Trevor Dinerman, who is the longtime announcer at Del Mar. What was your first introduction to Trevor, and was it like seeing a celebrity?
It definitely was like seeing a celebrity. I remember I was in the press box. It was opening day, and Trevor comes in, and I'm like, oh my God, that's Trevor Denman, and my boss calls me over. He goes, make sure you find the nicest chair for Trevor and bring it up to his booth. And I said, yes, sir, absolutely. So I got him a really nice chair. And he was delightful, just a very sweet guy, very caring person, very gentle type of guy. And seeing him was like seeing a celebrity that you've seen on TV or heard on TV for many years. And when I was a little kid, when I first went to the racetrack, I would always ask my dad, how does this voice in the sky know the horses and the names and the lengths in between them?
Because it's not easy.
It's not easy.
It's like professional ice skating. It looks really easy, but it's not.
Until you try it, right?
Yeah.
And eventually, I think that at that time I didn't know that I wanted to be an announcer when I was that young, but I think it was always in me. So the fact that I was so focused on Trevor and his calls from a young age, being able to see him was, to me, it was like I got home and I called my mom and dad and was like, I met Trevor today,
So going from meeting Trevor, working in the press box, how did you decide that race calling was really what you wanted to do? And that's not something there's not a school, there's not a YouTube video, you either have it or you don't. And
Right.
it does take a lot of practice. So how did that come about? A lot of them record races. What was your method?
Well, the first thing I ever did, I would be in my room, and it would be like 10:30 at night, and I'd be calling races from Cow Race Replays, which is a website. And I would wait until my parents were in the other room because I didn't want them to hear. I'd wait until they were in bed on the other end of the house. And they told me later, we would always be like, what the heck's he doing? He's talking to himself. Do we need to get this guy to therapy? Because they thought I was like talking to
They need
myself.
to have you tested because they thought you were talking to yourself.
They were like, is he okay? But they had no idea. I was just practicing calling races. And I think the step to practice in the press box, that's where I started practicing in there, was we had a talent show in high school, and I called a race for the class, and the horse who won was a horse that I had hot walked named Cozy Rosie. And I was scared to death to do it in front of everybody. But the class was getting into it, and at the quarter pole, they all started rooting for a horse, and it was great.
That's very
So
cool.
I was like, okay, I've called a race in front of people.
Yeah,
so that's,
your peers.
Exactly. So we got that out of the way. For Christmas, it was my first year before the press box. I asked for a pair of binoculars, and my uncle and aunt got me the binoculars, which are still upstairs, and those are the only binoculars I've used to call races. And they have these empty booths in the press box, these rooms, that writers would occupy, and there were a couple empty ones. So I would go into one of the empty rooms, I'd take my phone, I'd take my binoculars, and I'd call every race. And I was so obsessed with it. I would go in every single race, and I would be so hard on myself, but I just kept recording, kept listening back, kept practicing. I played baseball for 15 years, so I have an athlete's mind, sort of. I've always grown up as having an athlete's mentality, and one of the mental things you have to remember is with a specialized skill like race calling, you're only going to get good at it if there's repetition.
Right.
So I was just making sure every single race I could, I called. And for those who may or may not know, there's a very famous announcer, just one of the most historic announcers in all of sports, named Doc Emmerich, who's retired. He was known as the top hockey ring announcer, and he did the same thing. when he was in college, young guy, he would go into an empty place in the arena and he'd call the hockey game, and that's how he got good at it, and that's what I did.
So Matt practiced enough that right out of college, he was hired as the track announcer at Emerald Downs in Auburn, Washington. And how old were you? Because you had to be one of the youngest calling races at that time.
Right. I was 22. And when I got that job, I had not graduated college yet. I needed to graduate and then get there.
So it's not like you had a reel to send. What was the audition process or interview process?
It was interesting because they put out a press release, Emerald Downs in Auburn, Washington, and the press release said, hey, we're looking for an experienced race caller. Robert Geller, who's been here for 19 years, the only race caller you've ever had, he's moving on to other opportunities. And they hadn't announced it yet, but he had accepted a job at Woodbine, which is the top racetrack in Canada. And this was right around the time when Tom Durkin, who is just on Trevor's same level, very famous, iconic caller, he was retiring from New York. And usually it's like a game of musical chairs with these announcers. One guy goes one place and it's just a domino effect. So I had people say, you know what, that's going to be a tough job if you apply for that. You don't have experience. Racetrack management is not going to want to take a chance on somebody who is inexperienced. And one person who told me that, believe it or not, was Trevor.
Wow.
And he is not scared or upset that I would say that. He said, you know, I think you're really good, because he had listened to some calls of mine as I got better at it, and he was actually blown away by it, which I was surprised by. It was like Michael Jordan telling you, like, oh, you're really good at basketball. That's what it felt like to me. But he said, look, I think you've got a future in this, but there are going to be other people that are going to be ahead of you because they have experience. But I went for it. I told my dad, I said, I got to do this. And I don't think I'm getting this job, but I need my name out there, because
you don't know unless you try. You got to take every shot that you're given.
Exactly. So I sent an email to Sophia McKee, who was the director of marketing at the time, and I sent her a couple of my best race calls that I had recorded on my phone. I sent her a resume. She wrote back to me. She said, you have talent. Thank you for this. We'll get back to you. So coincidentally, I was doing an internship calling races at Santa Anita. That was my senior internship, practicing. I had gotten a job at HRTV, Horse Racing Television. Literally 2 days later, TVG bought out HRTV, so that went bad. So I created this internship to call races because I really wanted to do it. In my school, the University Chapman, said, we're all for it.
Very cool.
I'm driving home, binoculars are sitting in the passenger seat, get a call, Auburn, Washington. I feel it's the rejection. It's time to be rejected for the first time. And it was Sophia, and she said, we'd like to fly you up here tomorrow morning and call 2 races.
Wow.
So I was scared out of my mind.
Rightfully so.
I didn't even go back to my apartment. I drove to San Diego, which is an hour and a half away, made sure I had a good suit. Mom and Dad comforted me, said, you're going to do great. First time I ever flew on an airplane alone was this deal, and we're flying by Mount Rainier, and big mountain.
It's beautiful. You actually see Mount Rainier from Emerald Downs.
And I was sitting next to this guy, I still remember it, and he was like my psychologist. I was like venting to him, like, this is my first time on a plane, I'm doing this, I'm going for the dream job. And he's like, kid, sometimes you just got to suck it up and do it. And I'm like, oh, thanks.
That's good advice. That's actually really good advice.
So
sometimes you just got to do it.
That sort of made me laugh a little bit, because it's like, hey, we're just calling a race. So I'm nervous out of my mind. We get to Emerald Downs. Sophia picks me up at the airport. I meet Robert Geller in the booth. I meet a bunch of people. Howard Belvoir was the first person I met. Hall of Fame trainer in Washington. His son Van's a trainer. And he had a horse in the race named Clem Cadiddle-Hopper. So I had to memorize that and 5 other names.
Clem Cadiddle-Hopper.
Yeah. And he said, make sure you call my horse in front and don't screw this up. And I said, thanks, Howard. I appreciate it.
No pressure.
No pressure. So right before the race, Robert is like, what do you want me to do? You want me to stay with you or you want me to go? And I'm like, well, what do you want to do? He's like, I'm going to go get a cup of tea. I'll see you later. So he's zoomed out of the room, and I was all alone.
You might have been more nervous if he was in there.
I think so. I think it was a blessing in disguise.
Probably.
So he's like, you got this. And he walked away. And it was like a roller coaster. It's like you're on the coaster, and once it starts moving, you can't get off. You can't
was
jump
your first
off.
race a sprint or a route?
It was a route.
Okay.
Yep. And it was Coach Royal won the race. And it was actually a hard race to call. There were 6 horses in the race, and they were all mixing and matching and lead changes. It was a crazy race. And I remember after the race, I took off the headset, and I had no clue what I had just said. I didn't remember a single word. And
That's me every day.
Every day?
That's me every day.
Even a pro like yourself?
Yes.
And I ran outside. There's a little patio outside this very small booth at Emerald, and Robert was sitting there having his tea like nothing ever happened. I'm like, Robert, did I screw this up? He goes, no, you did fantastic. He goes, do it again. So I called the sprint the next race. I was a lot more confident. Next day rolls around. They take me out to this, by the way, they take me out to this gorgeous restaurant on the water. I get a steak, and my dad, I'm telling him about this dinner. He's like, you got this. Like, you might get this job. I'm like, I'm not going to get the job, you know. Next day, I have lunch with the president of the racetrack, and he offers me the job, to my astonishment, on Mother's Day. So
good Mother's Day gift. You did your mom proud.
Exactly. And I told him, I said, I'll accept if I pass my classes. And I had finals the next week, passed those, walked graduation, flew up a week later, and the dream began.
An amazing way for him to start out his very prominent career. So you spent several years at Emerald, which is a good place to start.
Sure, absolutely.
But obviously, what a lot of track announcers do, like horses they move up in ranks. So then you got the job at Golden Gate Fields in San Francisco. And you were there for how many years, Matt?
I was there for 6 years as a race caller, and the first year I was ever there, I just did the paddock and did handicapping.
So you cut your teeth handicapping, then went up to the announcer's booth. Every announcer, which I think is very interesting, has their own method of memorization. Some use markers, some use crayons. The process when horses come onto the track for post parade of reciting the horses, and you get very familiar with jockeys as well, how they sit, their features as well. What's your style, and how has it evolved since day one?
Well, with memorizing, it's a trial and error process, 100%, because you do what works for you, and there's no right or wrong reason or right or wrong way how to memorize as long as you can do it. So
right.
I remember when I was at Golden Gate and I went up to the booth, Frank Miramati, who has called here, he left like 30 crayons in the booth.
We always, when Frank Miramati was previously here, every meet we would have to order the Crayola 64 box, and we would have to order like 3 of them because there's only like a handful of crayons that he would use.
Right.
But he had to have those.
He wanted all the colors, And referencing what the crayons are used for, any coloring, sometimes announcers, they'll color in the silks of the rider, and that helps them memorize. I couldn't draw a stick figure. I stink at art. I tried it at Del Mar one time with coloring. I went about 2 horses. I said, this is stupid. It's not even helping me. It's not stupid for other people, but for me, it just was not working.
It didn't serve the purpose.
Correct. So, I'm a visual learner. I've always been a visual learner. So when you think about memory and how many things and people and places we remember, it's stellar. We don't think about it, but when you really dive into memory, it's amazing what the human mind can remember.
And that's a certain muscle that you're exercising every day. And now, mind you, he's got to do it 9, 10, sometimes 11 times a day. So by the time they call riders up in the paddock, 10, 11 minutes to post, to where they get on the track for post parade, there's less than 10 minutes that he has to memorize those names. A lot of good announcers will reference, say, Richard Mandela's horse, da-da-da-da, or the jockey's name. That's a lot of information to memorize in a very short amount of time.
Right.
And it's moving while that's even happening. It's not like you're pointing stuff out. It's while they're moving and changing position throughout the race. How did you come to learn, Matt, like the lengths? Because that's something I'm always so impressed by, is how to determine, the horse is 3 lengths in front, here's coming from behind. And in a 12-horse field, when they are spread out, a horse might be making a move on the outside from behind. There's so many different variables. Is it just the way you learn from Trevor and Robert?
Again, it's a trial and error process. It's watching races over and over and over, and also listening to other fellas and looking at the charts, the Equibase charts, and seeing, okay, well, this horse was this far apart of that horse, and what does the Equibase chart say? What does the race caller say? It just, you're talking about thousands and thousands of races being watched, let alone calls. So it's all just visual. And like I said, I'm a visual learner, so I memorize through what the jockeys are wearing, their colors. That's how I memorize the horses. And it's important to memorize because there's all that information you got to give out, and the worst thing you want to be doing is wasting time trying to look at your program and figure out who's who. You want to memorize so you can worry about, okay, well, we know who these horses are, so let's talk about the lengths. Let's talk about the trainer 1-2 races today or whatever. So it's all about watching races and I listen to a lot of announcers all the time to try to hear how they're doing it, and creating your own style is all about finding things from people that you admire in that field, finding what you like about each one and mixing it into your own. Because you're not going to be 100% authentic, but you want to be as authentic as you can and make your own style.
That's a good point.
That's how I look at the lengths, is just visualizing it, and eventually you just get better at looking and, okay, this horse is 3 ahead, this horse is 5 ahead, this horse, sometimes even you look, it's crazy, and you're like, well, they're not 3 ahead, but they don't seem 2 ahead, so I'm going to say 2.5. I mean, that's how it is sometimes.
So horse racing, I kind of compare to the U.S. Postal Service. It's rain, it's shine, it's snow, it's sleet, and we'll experience all of that and have here at Oaklawn, especially, I'm sure you did as well up in San Francisco with the fog. Right. And sometimes, I mean, that's got to be really stressful, because we've had numerous days here in the past where you can't see your hand in front of your face, much less horses on the backside. Right. And that's when improv really comes into play. And that's got to be a track announcer's nightmare.
It's one of them. There's a few nightmares in racetrack announcing, but it's definitely if you can't see, that's a problem.
Yeah, that's your job.
That's my job, is to see and analyze
and call the race.
Yeah, but it's fun, and if you do it well, it's fun to be able to do that.
So one thing that Matt is known for, and it traveled all the way from the West Coast here to Arkansas, is his rubber duck collection. So it came from 1 to 250.
We're at 254.
We're at 254, and it has grown even since he has been in the state of Arkansas. Tell us how that came to be, because if you go on any of Matt's social media platform, you'll see the rubber duck collection, or any of the industry articles. The rubber ducks have been front and center. Tell us how that came to be.
So when I was in Emerald, a group of us would go bowling at this bowling alley, and I wasn't good at bowling. Most of us were just having a good time, but it was something to do. So I needed a ride to the bowling alley, get a ride with my buddy Kevin, who's a jockey, actually, Kevin Orozco, and he had these ducks on his dashboard. Not a Jeep, but he had a car with a few rubber ducks, and I said, where'd you get those rubber ducks? Why are they sitting there? Oh, they're at the bowling alley. You can put $1 in, you got the claw, you go down, you pick up a duck. So every time I went, I just got a couple. Why? I don't know. I just decided to do it. And next thing you know, I had about 20 to 25 of them. And I'm thinking, what am I going to do with these rubber ducks? I mean, this is ridiculous. I'm 23 years old here. I don't need rubber ducks. So I put them in the announcer's booth, because I said, you know what? My announcer's booth is pretty plain right now. I got to spice this room
flair.
up. Yeah, this is my office. Let's make it interesting.
Grown. It is
grown.
He's got Elvis. He's got a gangster. He's got an Arkansas Razorback. I mean, and people send him these ducks from all around the world.
And that's what we were getting at, which is eventually what happened is I took a picture of these ducks, and next thing you know, fans from all over the place started sending me ducks.
Where's the farthest duck you've gotten?
France.
I've
gotten a duck from France. I've gotten a duck from Ireland. All over the world, just people write notes with the ducks. We love your work. We love your announcing. Love watching Golden Gate, or love watching Oaklawn. And next thing you know, it's just turned into something. And it's not me who turned it into anything. It's the people, the racing fans, that turn this into something. And even though the ducks are synonymous with me and they go wherever I go, It's been a pretty cool thing, and it reminds you, first of all, that you need to be professional. Whenever I see these ducks, I think about professionalism because people are always watching, they're paying attention, they care, and you want to do a good job no matter what kind of race it is. $5,000 claimer, grade 1 race, be professional, and also it goes to show that we're a tight-knit community here in racing. We've got fans all over the world, and we're a rather small group compared to some other sports, but we are a tight group.
So being in horse racing, the amount of time that you have, what is a moment, and it might not have been a race that you called, it might be a race that you've seen and witnessed. What's one of your favorite moments in horse racing history that you've got to experience?
Wow, there are a few. I mean, I think one thing that really stands out was when Candy Ride won the Pacific Classic, because that was the race that really hooked me onto racing. I put $2 to win on him. My favorite rider, Julie Crone, at the time was riding.
Who will be here in a few weeks for
Yep.
the Racing Hall of Fame weekend.
Great rider, and the horse was undefeated. And I was 11 years old, and I said, Dad, I'm going to take $2 of my allowance money and put a bet on Candy Ride for me, and fell in love with the game, not because of the bet necessarily, but just watching the superstar horse and the excitement. And being able to watch Zenyatta was a thrill. I think
Yes.
I probably saw her about a half dozen times live. The last time I ever saw her run, she beat a runner that I had worked with, Switch, so I was at Hollywood Park, only one in the grandstand not rooting for her. And she nailed our filly about 5 strides at the wire. There was a horse named Sydney's Candy who I
Great
worked
horse.
with. I walked him every day. He was just a really nice horse, and he broke the track record on the turf at Del Mar. Went 10 ahead, dueled on the lead with a Bob Baffert horse, put him away, and broke the track record, and that was probably the most exciting. And then some fun races, calling the Long Acres Mile for the first time with Striker PhD, a big fan favorite. That was my first graded stake. Calling Rombauer, he was the first horse that I've ever called that have gone on to win a Triple Crown race. He won the Preakness, won the El Camino Real Derby,
Yeah.
and being able to call the 3-year-old series so far has been a real thrill for me here at Oaklawn.
So again, Matt is just the 7th track announcer in Oaklawn's 120-year history. Matt, what are 3 things that you recommend people to do when they come to the track?
First thing, go to the paddock, go up close to the horses, enjoy it. I'm the type of person, when I go to the track, I don't like to sit around. I like to walk around. I like to watch the races from different places. But being able to go down and be up close and personal with the horses, the people who work with them, the riders who ride them, it's a different type of experience than maybe if you're at a baseball game and you're sitting in the seats well away from the action. You're
Right.
there, but you're still well
Right.
a ways. Here, you're right there. And you get to appreciate the equine athlete and appreciate the human athletes. I would say if you're at the track, one thing you want to do is, for many races, go to different places and watch the races. One of my favorite places to watch a race when I'm not an announcer is all the way down the stretch when they come off the corner, and you can hear the horses and you can hear the jockeys imploring their horses. I like to go high, low, on the rail. It's just a really good time, and again, it sort of goes to show when you're in different places, you'll come to realize, wow, there's a lot of ways and places and angles to enjoy this sport. And also, if you're at the track, I would say the third thing would be make sure that you get some good food.
I was just
There.
going to say, what's your go-to racetrack food?
Ooh, I'm like a cheeseburger type of guy.
Oh, good call. The
Yeah.
Oaklawn burger in the
Oaklawn
infield's
burger.
amazing.
Yes.
So, yeah, we will get you one of those. You can't leave the booth to go to
No,
the
no.
infield, but we'll get you
I've
an
gotten a
Oaklawn
couple
burger.
deliveries.
They're good.
already.
I bet.
Yeah, I've been very lucky.
So Matt is going to do the pre-race show Oaklawn today with Crystal and I at 11:10. Looking forward to some
Yes.
handicapping. We are so fortunate to have you on the roof calling these amazing horses. Ladies and gentlemen, please give it up for track announcer Matt Dinerman.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, everybody.